Hey everyone, me Kevin here. In this video, we're going to cover a bearish indicator that just turned from yellow to red. And we're going to talk about where we sit even after the April recovery, what this indicator usually forestalls, what it could mean. And I want to give you a quick update on some of the Trump tariff numbers. Obviously, we're all lying in wait to see what happens tomorrow with the Chinese negotiation. My guess is Donald Trump is going to pit it at a fantastic success and that we are close to a deal. Well, the reality is likely that Chinese negotiations are going to take just as long as they did in 2018. As history shows, negotiations took so long in 2018 and throughout 2019 that we never actually got a trade deal. We got a Fed bailout at the end of 2018, then COVID hit, and we still didn't have a deal, and then we got another Fed bailout. So in other words, it seems like we're twice as likely to get a Fed bailout than we are to get a deal with China. But with that said, I want to talk about this indicator because as much as there's a lot of enthusiasm and hope coming back into the stock market, a lot of folks are wondering what's driving this rally. There are a few things driving the rally, and it's certainly not the yellow indicator that has just turned red. One of the things that could be driving the rally, at least per the doomers over at Doomberg, is, quote, hope rather than fundamentals, and that a, quote, reckoning is coming. Part of that, they say, is driven by the enthusiasm compounded by about $240 billion of corporate buybacks that were announced, which is really good and comes after Q1. So it makes sense that we're seeing that now outside of a blackout period. And again, very supportive of an equity rally that's potentially driven by hope of a deal with China. We'll see what happens. But what is this indicator, and is it something that we should really care about? Because, hey, maybe we will get Chinese tariffs down from 145% to 60% or 80%, or who knows, TBD. So far, we've got one trade deal in the bag with a surplus nation, and now the question is, what kind of certainty are we going to get going forward? Well, what we have is a bearish indicator from Bloomberg Intelligence's proprietary model, they call it. What they did is they went back to 1996, and they found that the S&P 500 has averaged a 5.9% annualized loss during the last 7 times this indicator has turned red. Now, pull up this indicator in just a moment. Keep in mind, when you see yellow, yellow's actually a good thing as well. Typically, yellow on an annualized basis can give you anywhere up to a 13 to 20+% return. On a green basis, you could get even more than that, sometimes as much as a 16% annual return or more. So think about yellow as like green, and green is really green. Because when I first saw the model, I'm like, oh, okay, like, you know, yellow's probably like not that great, right? No, yellow is still smoking great. And it makes sense because like 2004, 5, 6, 7, yellow, most of the period here between 2010 and 2019, with the exception of 15, 16, 17 here, were yellow. Of course, the Nike swoosh recovery from 2022 is perfectly demonstrated right here. Look at that beautiful Nike swoosh. If only somebody told us this beautiful Nike swoosh was coming. Oh wait, I did every single day over here. And people told me that I was a perma bull and I could never be bullish. But that's okay. You know, people have opinions that change like a light switch. That said, you could see very, very aggressive risk-on rewards after, or returns, which are also rewarding, after COVID or basically around Federal Reserve U-turns, right? So really exciting times in markets when the Federal Reserve is bailing out markets. And then less so, you know, very quick U-turn over here in 2022 when the Federal Reserve started getting aggressive, right? You also got this in the mid-90s soft landing, which is interesting because that mid-90s soft landing is when they started this indicator. And so it'd be fascinating to see, hey, could we go into another green regime here after whatever the heck it is that we're going to go through? But green is a glorious time to invest. And so where we sat since June of 2023 was actually in this yellow territory, and this has just turned to red. Now, red is associated with negative annualized returns of 5.9 to 7.6%, depending on if you're looking at the S&P market cap or equal weighted. And the equal weighted fell more probably because, you know, usually the top components of the S&P 500 are a little bit more resilient. In addition to that, you have an expectation that over the next 6 months, you shouldn't expect almost any return in the stock market when it turns red. It just turned red in March, and the components of it are expected to stay red for the duration of April, though not all of the data is available yet to work out the April data. This works through using a combination of price to book, volume, the 200-day moving average, year-over-year changes, EPS change estimates, the changes in the money supply. It basically tries to put everything together. And most of the components that are available so far indicate that we will still be in the red territory for April. And, again, the forward returns for this are flat at best, and worst case scenario, quite well in the red. Now, during the times where this has been positive in the past, at least on a market cap basis, 2 out of the last 3 times that we were red, we had nominally green returns, but during those 2 times, we had the Federal Reserve bailing out markets. That was December of 2018, and then the COVID U-turn. So the signal wasn't perfect during those times, probably because of the suddenness of the Federal Reserve intervention. And another time you had a nominally green return was in a period of 2014 to 2016. Who knows? Not every single indicator is perfect. But I think that's really interesting because it's a tool that suggests, hey, we're in a unique period of time in the market where usually we want to be maybe more cautious when things turn red. And so what I wanted to look at is how long we usually get red. And so what I noticed is we got red in the dot-com bubble essentially until April or March over here of 2003, which is when the Federal Reserve bailed out markets. It looks like we got red until about February of 2009, which is exactly where the Fed bailed out markets, and then we actually turned green to yellow. Remember, yellow is a really good thing too. We had this really brief, odd period here in '89 where we had a really short period of time where things were red. Not exactly sure now why that is, but it's possible maybe we'll have the conditions of the sort of the late '90s, though I think that's probably unlikely given the conditions of the employment market in the late '90s were actually substantially improving, whereas when we look at, say, 27 weeks unemployed in our employment market, things are actually rotating down. Now, who knows? We don't necessarily have to have a recession. Hopefully not, because it would be very bad for a lot of different people. Losing jobs are terrible. The entire economy slows down, everything, goods, service, everything's painful. But you'll notice when you start pointing out where the Federal Reserve bailouts are, in fact, we could just do it together, you start noticing that if you're in an environment where you're not really close to a Fed bailout, you're probably looking at an extended period of red. So what I'm going to provide here are various different Federal Reserve bailouts. You actually saw one right here, which is kind of a unique period. That's one of the times where we actually still saw gains. And then, of course, you had a Federal Reserve bailout over here at the beginning of 2020, so right about here. So all of these periods of time where we had red were, oops, that should be over here. That would be about March of 2009, February 2009, about right there. So you see that most of the time where we go from periods of red to yellow or green, it's because of a Federal Reserve bailout. Now, that was not true in 2022 to 2023, which I also think is very interesting. Okay, I'm not sure why it gave me an octagon or whatever that is, hexagon, pentagon. I don't know, I didn't count the sides, but I just wanted an arrow. There we go. So now what's interesting is let's use an orange one for where we did not have Federal Reserve support and we had fantastic returns afterwards. Mid-2023 was a period where we went from red to, again, I call this a version of green, the yellow, without the Federal Reserve. You know, if anything, it was in the face of the Federal Reserve after sort of the rolling recession or whatever you'd say. We also did go to yellow in 2016 after this sideways period between 15, 16 to 17 over here. You can see this was quite an extended period of time, and this was an extended period of pain as well. And so absent a federal bailout, there's really like a Federal Reserve bailout, there's only one time this indicator has really been short, right? So let's get rid of the Fed bailouts. Fed bailout here, get rid of this as a Fed bailout. You know, we'll even leave the arrows. Let's look for when have we had a short period of red with no Federal Reserve bailout. And there's only been one time this indicator has been red and we went green immediately after without the Federal Reserve bailing us out. Maybe we could make this happen again. It seems like historically and statistically, when this happens, we are in for a long period of red because over here, 2015, 16, 17, sideways returns, no Fed bailout. Over here, 18 months of red, no Fed bailout. Those are extended periods of time without the Federal Reserve intervening. The short periods of time usually, or the end of the periods, are usually when you have a Federal Reserve bailout. So in other words, we have 4 cases here where the Federal Reserve bailed out the red. We have 2 cases where markets returned back to yellow only after 18 months to 24 months of red. And we only have 1 example where we had a very, very little short period of time interrupting our green stock market momentum. So, is there a chance that this time will be different from all of the other, like the vast majority of the cases here, that the market will keep going up in the face of no Federal Reserve bailout? Of course, anything is possible. But at least based on this as an indicator for whatever indicator it could be, it does suggest caution. And frankly, it kind of makes sense. It makes sense that in a period of FOMO by the dipping on hopium and optimism over trade deals, which so far have been pretty lame, the only one that we've had, in addition to corporate stock buybacks on the back of Q1 front-running earnings, and the potential supply chain reckoning that we would expect to start feeling by, let's call it June, end of May, July, doesn't seem like we should really be expecting substantial stock market returns going forward from this point. However, for the last 2 weeks, I have been advocating using trailing stops to everybody in the Meet Kevin membership. And while I can't give you personalized financial advice, I can say that these trailing stops have actually been killing it. And we've been able to see a ride up with that downside protection of a trailing stop. Anyway, if you want to learn more about House Hack, my real estate startup, we have an earnings call coming up Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Look forward to seeing you there. If you want to learn more about the Meet Kevin membership, join us. Come over to meetkevin.com. Try it out for 30 days. See if it works for you. See if it helps you make some money. And folks, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks again. Goodbye and good luck.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.